Typical March weather. Okay.
Well, now that Penny joined us, I figured I would add that in.
Well, Penny's got a
Oh.
nice rainbow behind her. That's
Sorry,
wonderful.
I got talking with our client and got going a little late. There we go. So
It's your show,
Right.
Penny.
let me see how. Oh, here we go again. Can I share my screen without being?
Oh, you should be able to if you can. I'll make you the.
I just found a big green one that.
It should be right at the bottom, green share screen pointing up.
Her. Every time this happens to me.
It's not easy.
Do I need to make you the host?
Her.
Let me see. Ooh,
I see something happening.
there you go.
Good job.
Yay.
Why is
There we go.
my screen looks so weird though? Oh my god. All right. Can everybody see it?
Yep. Yep.
Woo!
Yes.
We're making progress.
Excellent.
So this is just basically going to be a quick, well, hopefully quick, review of confidentiality and mandated reporting, and touch base on a couple of other things. So as we all know, our confidential communication is given to us by New Hampshire law, which is RSA 173C. And it is basically talks about any communication between us and any victim that we talk to. So that's not necessarily just our primary victims, it also includes our secondary victims. So parents or family members, friends that are affected by the primary victims of abuse are secondary victims, and we often work with them as well. And so any of that communication is going to be kept confidential, unless obviously they give us written permission. Just a reminder that even though they technically call us a counselor in the statute, we aren't certified therapists or counselors. Basically, the way I look at it is we provide trauma-informed crisis, AKA peer support, which is basically what the statute is calling counseling. And it's important for us to make that known to people, because oftentimes people will call here thinking that we're therapists or that is the type of support that we provide. I often just explain to people, you know, we aren't therapists or counselors. However, we do know how trauma works and how domestic violence affects trauma, and how to help people kind of work through it in the moment. So we do have complete confidentiality like therapists and or counselors. However, if there is a third party in the room, there isn't, that confidentiality basically gets waived, because basically what's happening is we cannot make that third party not say anything. We can't, they are not bound by our confidentiality. So, you know, for example, I've had somebody show up for a restraining order and had their parent with them to let them know that the confidentiality is very limited now that there is a third person in the room. It doesn't mean that we're going to go out and tell everybody about stuff or just openly discuss it. It just means that we cannot guarantee that that person is going to keep things confidential. There are 3 cases where that third person is basically an extension of our confidentiality. So this is basically interpreters, foreign language, American Sign Language, those types of things. Somebody who may be there to physically assist the victim if the victim has a disability that doesn't give them limited mobility or something like that. And then also in our support group, anybody who's part of a support group, that confidentiality is supposed to be maintained. So here, this is just going back to, we can speak to a third party on behalf of the victim or for the victim as long as we have a written waiver, which we have a specific form here at the office for that. And they have to specifically write in there what it is that you can communicate to this party and with whom it can be shared. It's not just going to be, you know, I don't know, to Joe Schmo and you can tell them anything you want. It's got to be very specific. It's got to limit who and what is going to be shared. Also, if I'm A, talking too fast, or B, you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to stop me in the middle.
Are you gonna give us a printout of all of this?
I can do that, yes,
That would be great.
absolutely. I tried to create a PDF that I could email you guys, but it wouldn't print so that like you had I couldn't set it up so it had like 3 small slides with the lines next to it so you could like write notes. It would only give you this whole thing. So I didn't get a chance to figure it out, but I will make sure that I can have printouts for you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So while we do, I feel like I missed. I think I skipped something. Sorry, I'm just going through here. Okay, I guess not. I got my slides mixed up. So while we are mandated reporters, which is apparently on the next slide instead of before this, we do not have a duty to warn, which means if somebody is threatening suicide or some other self-harm, or they're threatening to harm someone else, we cannot call for help for them. We cannot call an ambulance. We cannot call law enforcement, even if they ask us to do it. We can offer, I've done it. I've had people on the phone who have called and done a conference call. So I'm on the line with them when they make the phone calls. Sometimes it's just knowing that, hey, I'm going to be here. I'm on the phone while you're making it the phone call. I'll support you through it. Encouraging them. The big thing is encouraging them to make that phone call. We actually had a situation where there was a victim calling us here at the office. Ellen, I think you might have been a part of that one, where she was actually threatening to stab somebody and kept telling us she had a knife. So she was gonna stab him. And we couldn't call. We kept telling her, call police. If he's there, call the police. So unfortunately, we are bound by the confidentiality and not able to make those calls.
May I ask
However,
a question about that?
I'm sorry.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Would they call 911 or what's the number that they call for like for suicide? I forgot the number. I can look.
I don't have it.
988.
988.
Yeah,
Thank-
Okay,
I want to have it memorized. Is there another number they might call? Like the
no,
police?
typically it's 911.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. We are mandated reporters of child abuse and neglect. What they used to call adult and elder abuse, it's actually vulnerable adult and neglect, because basically what it boils down to is being what is deemed quote unquote elderly does not in and of itself make someone vulnerable or, you know, unable to take care of themselves.
Ellen and I say thank you very much.
Me too.
We had someone come in from the Bureau of Adult Services, and he was the one that we had a big discussion around that, because I do believe that the law may actually still say elderly, so to speak, but their policies and procedures around that are that being, I think statutorily it's 60, that being 60 or older doesn't in and of itself make someone a vulnerable adult, which was a very good discussion for us to have. So for child abuse, we have the list here of most of the stuff is pretty obvious that we know about: sexual abuse, intentional physical harm, psychological. So this is another kind of difference too that you'll see in these two statutes when it comes to abuse and neglect of children and vulnerable adults, is that they'll throw in the psychological aspect of things. When we start talking about abuse as domestic abuse in our statute, emotional abuse is not considered. It is simply physical abuse, the threat of physical abuse, and then your standard stalking, harassment, damage to property type of things. But the actual emotional abuse is not considered in those statutes. So physically injured by other than accidental means kind of goes back to intentionally physically injured, I feel like. Human trafficking, or anything under RSA 632A, which is female mutilation, which, God, I hope that doesn't happen in this country anymore. Sexual abuse for children. Again, this is grooming is one of the big things. We use persuasion, enticement, coercion of any child to engage in or having a child assist another person in engaging in any sexually explicit conduct or simulation for the purpose of producing any visual depiction of such conduct. Then the rape, molestation, prostitution, or other form of sexual exploitation of children or incest. Neglected child. Any child who has been abandoned by his or her parents or guardian or custodian. So again, these things are not necessarily deemed just for biological parents. It can be adoptive parents. I'm sorry, I can't speak. A legal guardian, obviously. A child that is without proper parental care or control, subsistence, or education as required by law, or other care or control necessary for their physical, mental, or emotional health. When it is established that the child's health has suffered or is likely to suffer serious impairment, and the deprivation is not due primarily to the lack of financial means of the parent, guardian, or custodian. So basically what this boils down to, and kind of the way the clarification was made for us when DCYF came in, is living out of your car in and of itself is not going to make you a neglectful parent. So if your car runs and you have heat and you have air conditioning and you're sleeping in there, but your child is still able to take showers places and still has food and is going to school, you're not considered being neglectful, just because you financially at that moment cannot afford a place to live. Or even the same thing, kind of as couch surfing, you know, if you're providing for your child what you can, then you're not being neglectful. And then
Interesting thing on that, I had a call not too long ago of and it was somebody that was not really in a domestic violence situation, but in the course of conversation, she had mentioned that somebody had reported her to DCYF because of the fact that they claimed that her child was sleeping in her car at night. And that she told me that that was untrue, that she'd provided a roof and I mean, she did do couch surfing and stuff, but I was kind of interested that she made the comment in reference to the fact that she got reported about something that wasn't true and had heard where other people who have had children sleeping in cars have never gotten reported.
so that's going to be kind of a case by most of the general public don't know that. And we'll come across a lot of people who will say, I need to find a house because I don't want my kids taken away from me, or something to that effect. Because they don't understand that. They, you know, with this day and age of TV and movies, you know, they make it seem like if your kid misses one meal, then they're going to take your kids away. And I think everybody kind of has this preconceived notion that if you are not providing the quintessential perfect life for your child, then DCYF needs to be involved and take your children away. So that person may have reported them thinking it was a bad thing, and DCYF probably took the call and was kind of like, yeah, okay, we'll let them know. But my guess, based on what I know and I've heard, probably checked it out and then closed the case. You know, they'd have to look into it, but that in and of itself is not going to make DCYF take their child away. Excuse the expression. However, I can tell you right now, you have to be a very shitty parent in this state to have your child taken away from you. I have seen children left in places that they have no business being left. I have the state's ultimate goal is reunification and trying to get children back together with their parents no matter what. And so if people are actually trying to take care of their children and provide for their children, it's highly unlikely that their children are going to get taken away.
I will tell you, after sitting in those DCYF meetings for a number of years, and now Krista does it, you know, people used to get scared that, oh, they're going to take my kids, they're going to take my kids. I will tell you, what Penny said is absolutely right. They move towards reunification sometimes quicker than I think they should, but that is their goal, is to reunify these people and to correct the situation. I tell them, you know, I sit in those meetings, DCYF has more kids than they know what to do with. They don't want yours.
Can you clarify what's the upper age range for making a report? Like, is it 16 or what? For
under the age of 18.
Okay.
In the state of New Hampshire, anybody under the age of 18 is still considered a child.
Okay.
Unless they've been emancipated.
I was just going to say that. Thank you, Brad.
How often does that happen?
Occasionally.
Not very often. However, one of our previous clients actually emancipated herself.
Okay.
But actually, the one and only case I've ever heard of. So the last form of neglect is when they're unable to perform their responsibilities for the child because they're incarcerated, hospitalized, or have other physical or mental incapacities that do not allow them to do their job as a parent. A vulnerable adult. Generally speaking, it's anyone over the age of 18 who either has a guardian, has a disability or illness that affects their daily living, and cannot complete two basic activities of daily life. They looked at these three forms of abuse. Again, you see emotional abuse, which we don't see in our domestic violence statute, power and authority, verbal harassment, unreasonable confinement, which could result in the mental anguish or most emotional distress. Still surprises me that we haven't passed on to other statutes. Physical, I don't think that really needs, and sexual, I really don't feel that those need much explanation. I think we probably all have a pretty decent handle on all of those. Neglect, again, an act or omission which results in the deprivation of essential services or support necessary to maintain the minimum mental, emotional, or physical health and safety of a vulnerable adult. One of the differences is self-neglect is actually part of adult services. So someone can be reported for basically not being able to take care of themselves. And we've had to do it. There are people sometimes that just, they physically, mentally, emotionally are not able to take care of their daily basic needs. And we need to contact somebody to let them know and have somebody step in. Exploitation is also part of that. This includes illegal use of their person or property for another person's profit or advantage, or basically financial. I think most people, when we think of exploitation, we think of financial exploitation of, swindling them out of their money or taking over their bank accounts and spending the money ourselves, for anything other than basically what they're supposed to be doing with the money. If you believe that you have a case of child or adult abuse or neglect, it's always important to discuss your concerns with that individual, letting them know, from what you're telling me, this sounds like it falls into the category of child abuse or neglect, and it's something that probably will need to be reported, and help them understand that. Most of the time you will find that when you're having this discussion, the report isn't going to be made against the person you're talking to. It's being made against their abuser. However, when you bring up making a DCYS report, they're going to panic and be like, oh my God, no, I can't call, you can't do that. And trying to talk them through the process and helping them understand that if this does happen, the report that we're making is based on the abuse of the other person towards your children.
I have a question, Penny.
Yes.
So how is it that for mental abuse, verbally berating or verbally, anything that is negative to a child, why is that not considered an abuse that would get reported?
It is, well, by the statute, it is. And there are times, and Brad, you may be better at this than I am on this part of the discussion. I think there are times they take it into consideration. However, I feel like it is more of a consideration when it coincides with physical abuse or neglect.
Okay,
And generally speaking, you have to be able to prove that there's been long-term psychological damage to the child, which, doesn't happen overnight. It's, cumulative. So a lot of times that comes out from therapists, and Penny's right, if it's in conjunction, a lot of times it is in conjunction with physical abuse as well. But every parent has probably said something mean to their child at one point or another. And so, but they look at the long term, what's been going on, and if it causes long-term psychological damage, which, in my opinion, can be somewhat subjective, but that's why they have experts that can determine that.
Can you
Okay.
explain what it means where it says, explain you are going to follow up, laying to them you with your backup?
Going along with that, I think as far as, now I just lost my train of thought, sorry. There's a typo in there that
Yeah.
apparently spell check can't collect, couldn't find and help me out with. So basically I'm supposed to say, explain to the individual that you're gonna follow up with your backup and
Okay.
discuss the situation with your backup.
Thank you.
And I will fix that before I print it and send it, get it out to everybody. Good old cut and paste. So once you've kind of discussed that with them, they understand the process, you're gonna let them know that somebody's going to call them back. Then you call your backup and discuss the situation with them. If it is determined that a report needs to be made, we will never expect a volunteer to make that report. An advocate or staff member will take care of that. Typically, what we try to do is to encourage that individual to make the report themselves. And oftentimes we will say, you can come here, we'll sit with you as you make the phone call and you make the report, so that they feel they have support and they're not doing it alone. They may say, no, I don't want to make the report. And then in that situation, we will have to make the report to DCYF. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I think the other problem with the emotional abuse, and again, kind of going back to what Brad was saying, is it's subjective, and I think that's another hard part of holding people accountable for it, I think, and why DCYF probably struggles with it a little bit. Working with minors.
Can I have another question?
Absolutely.
DCYF is Department of Children, Youth,
and families.
families. So even if it's an adult, you would still call DCYF?
No, you would call the Bureau of Elderly and Adult Services.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So it does not happen frequently, but there are times that we work with minors. Most I find, and Brad, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I find most of the time this occurs on Resource Connect, where we don't get a lot of information about the person. The other times, like if we're getting phone calls, I would say the majority of the time that I've ever received a phone call from a minor, the parent's been sitting in the background. So that so to speak, they're making the call together. It's not the minor. It's usually a parent outside of the home that's being reported by the child and the other parent, but the child is really the one that is facing or is experiencing the abuse, but the parent is there while they're making the call.
Penny,
Yes.
I recently had a lap call that involved a minor.
Mhm.
And luckily Denise already knew of that minor. And so I kind of gave it to her to make the phone call to talk to him.
And that's
Because-
perfect.
Because in all the years I've been doing this, I have never spoke to a minor.
And that's part of the reason why we added this, is because we realize it's not something we talk about much, because it doesn't happen very often. But in those rare cases that it does happen, we want people to be prepared. And so the magic number with all of this is 13. So we can work with minors 13 and older up to 3 times without parent permission. During those conversations, we need to remind them that we are mandated reporters and that any abuse and neglect is going to need to be reported. Typically, like I said, you will find that it is either a parent outside the home that is being reported by a child and the other parent, or sometimes it is a minor that's been assaulted by a boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other who is reporting an assault. In those situations, during that time period, we want to encourage the child or the minor to talk to their parents, to let their parents know what's going on, encourage them, and again, reminding them of our mandated reporter status. It kind of goes back to the empowerment. We're trying to empower that individual to have a voice, to speak up for themselves. There's nothing wrong with offering to be there with them when they talk about it. Or, telling them they can bring their parents here. There are times where we will encounter minors, young adults, adolescents at the CAC. So in those situations, when a minor comes to us and they're with a parent at the time, so like the CAC, or maybe even they stop by the office to come talk to us about something. At that time, I usually address this with the parents, letting them know that anything that is said is completely confidential. However, and that we are here to support their child, but letting them know that basically saying, with your permission, we are here to help them and keep the conversation confidential. It's kind of the roundabout way of actually getting the parents' permission, letting them know that their child may be calling us. Those circumstances are a little different too, because the parent already knows what's going on. So it's not like it's something new. And oftentimes you'll find that the parent is just glad to know that their child has somebody to talk to. And sometimes just knowing that the conversation stays between the two of you is what it takes for them to be able to open up. If you're unsure how to handle, or if you're uncomfortable with a situation, no worries. It's exactly what Ellen did. Just give a call to your backup. That's what we're here for. That's why backups have backups. That's why Brad and I are here. We do it all the time. There's times where there's a situation we don't know how to handle, that we're calling each other or saying, look, this is a situation or an individual I can't work with right now. Can you take care of this for me? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Nobody is ever going to say no or be upset, because that's what we do. And it's not just for this. I think I try to talk about this every single time that we kind of do one of these trainings is that we work as a team. There's nothing wrong with ever reaching out for extra help, for somebody to take something over for you, any of that. You're never alone. We're never alone. There's always somebody there that can help you. They can answer your questions or take care of a situation for you. Brad, I don't know if I'm going to get 2 hours out of this. I thought I could drag it out.
I have a question. This is Pat.
Absolutely.
I have a question. So when it says that a minor, we could talk to a minor 3 times, is that individually? Say I could talk to the minor, or 3 times to the whole starting point group?
To the whole starting point group.
Okay,
So look at it as starting point as a whole can
Okay.
work with a minor up to 3 times.
Okay.
great.
That's a good question.
That was all very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and get the other slideshow up.
What do I have here? Huh. This is showing.
What is that?
I have no, it's the back of my, it's wherever my camera is, but I have no idea.
What?
Which camera?
There we go.
I switched to gallery here. Oh, there we go. I don't know. Hit something.
It was an interesting shot, Pat.
You know, it was the back of, I think I'm on, the camera's facing me, but I hit something, the camera was facing the back of my desk. You can see my messy papers. Oh, excellent.
So this one came in as a request.
Yes, and that was for me, thank you, because I had a lap call maybe a month ago, and it's been so long since I had the lap call training that I wanted to have a refresher. So thank you very
Absolutely. It never hurts.
And I thank you, Pat, because I recently had a lap call and it's been a while.
much. Yes, we need these refreshers.
And the one thing I will say about lap calls is we all have a tendency to stress about them because it's law enforcement and the police are calling. To be 100% truthful, they're actually kind of easier
Yes,
than
they
a
are.
regular crisis line call
Yep.
because a majority of the work has really been done for you, and really, within 10 to 15 minutes, you're done, which is nice. But they're still kind of overwhelming at first because you hear, oh, it's a lap call, and it's like, oh, now I got to talk to police, and then and there's a little extra to it at the same time. So what is LAP? It's the Lethality Assessment Program. So this program was actually started in Maryland. They did a big research project through the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. And in their research, they found that 28 to 33% of victims, the actual homicidal incident, so the death, was the first act of violence in that relationship. So there was probably verbal, emotional abuse going on, and that it ended with the homicidal act, which was the only physical act.
Ooh.
So basically what they took from this is that first responders were kind of missing those non-physical red flags of, oh no, there's an issue here, and we need to help these people out. Also, during this time period, so in 2001, they did a study in 11 of the, I think they were all relatively large US cities. So approximately 44% of abusers were arrested. A third, so these, and again, these are all homicides. So the year before the victim was killed, these things happened. 44% of the abusers were arrested. Only a third of the victims had actually contacted police, and only 4% had actually contacted a domestic violence hotline or shelter.
Wow.
So basically what they were finding is there's these resources and this help and support out there, but it wasn't getting access for whatever reason. So this research project that they did became the danger assessment tool, which is what they used to create what we now call the lap screening. So again, they reviewed the cases in those 11 cities. They also conducted a study of women who had been nearly killed by their intimate partners, and, you know, found out what was going on in those circumstances. And by doing this, they found 11 questions that, or 11 factors that really were indicative of high lethality, situations where women were almost killed or killed. So once they did this and then created the lethality assessment program, in Maryland, just in that first year, they saw a 32% decline in DV-related deaths. After some more work in 2020, they added a 12th question to the lethality assessment itself. So what is it? It's an easy to use process that has, so first of all, I also should clarify, this tool is not used by us. This tool is used by, around here, just law enforcement. It's also meant to be used by, I believe, doctors and other medical personnel as well. I find around here, the only people that use it are law enforcement. So it does have a 12-question screening tool, and then underneath it, I thought I had a picture of it, which is kind of, I think it might be the next slide, is actually, it explains to law enforcement what they need to do. If they answer yes to these questions, it's an automatic response. If they, so basically, if they answer yes to any of the first 3 questions, automatic call for law enforcement. Then if they answer, I believe it's 4 of any questions 4 through 12, then it becomes a response. But it spells it out for them. It gives them our phone number to call. Again, it's used by police officers. And this is used to identify high-risk victims, not necessarily just, shouldn't say just. However, people that are in situations that aren't quite as lethal or high risk. And basically, it's what it's meant to do is to connect victims to services at the time that they really need them. And I think part of what they were finding is that basically by going to a call and saying, oh, here's a phone number you can call, victims weren't doing it. You know, it was, you know, okay, I'll put it in my pocket and maybe I'll call later. And then either, you know, they forget about it or they just didn't do it or what have you. So the connections weren't being made. What they found is that if you made that connection in the time of the crisis or close to it, people were more likely to get those services that they need and get the help that they need. So again, it's
Question.
sure.
Wait, if I remember. Oh, yeah. When the police officer is talking to that victim, I'm just trying to remember. I don't remember if they say I can call starting point for you to talk to somebody, but could they suggest calling and that person could say, no, I don't want you to call, and the police would not call?
So Here,
They do call.
they're supposed to. Let's put it this way, no matter what, they're supposed to call. Whether they do, I cannot make guarantees.
I can tell you that
I-
I've had a couple instances where they did call and the victim did not wish to speak to us.
And
Okay.
I I do feel that is getting more the case. In the past, law enforcement would, if they said no, law enforcement wouldn't call. I feel that it is getting more that they make the call anyways, and they're supposed to. They're supposed to call no matter what. And I think the thought process behind that is, the victim may be saying outwardly, no, I don't want you to call, but maybe inside they're thinking, yeah, I'd really like to talk to somebody. So if they make that call and they're like, you sure you don't want to talk to somebody? They're right here. Maybe they'll change their mind in that moment and actually take the phone.
Thank
you. Did somebody have a question? Okay. So the other part of this is they were finding first responders, but also victims weren't understanding the correlation of lethality and how some of these things that were happening were indicative of a potential for higher danger or for lethality. It also, again, tries to connect people to programs. It also looks to build a collaboration between law enforcement, DV programs, things like that, so that there is that communication, that there is that relationship and that connection. And it is the only program of its kind in the US. There's nothing else like it. So here we go. So this is the form that they fill out. And you can see it's just a checkbox, yes, no, they don't answer. Down at the bottom, you can see where it explains what to do. This is who you call. They're not supposed to use the victim's phone. And these are just kind of some statistics that kind of focus around what the lap screening does. So victims are 15% more likely to be killed if their abuser has previously threatened them. The presence of a firearm in the home increases the risk of homicide by at least 500%. Strangulation, which is something that a lot of people don't understand, and a lot of our clients will, so to speak, minimize or refer to it by saying choke. And so sometimes we have to get a little bit more information. Strangulation increases the risk of homicide by 750%. So that means that they're 8 times more likely to be killed by their partner if their partner has strangled them. The way I look at it is that is the ultimate form of control. If you think about strangulation, this is your ultimate form of control, because you literally hold that person's life in their hand, and you are sitting there and you are letting that person know, I decide whether you live or die. The new question that was added, the number 12 question, was asking about basically being pressured or forced into having sex when you didn't want to. People are 7% more likely to be killed in those situations. A lot of people didn't, especially wives, didn't see that as an issue, because there's still some of that old school thought of you can't rape your wife. That is part of your wifely duties, that even if you don't want to, you have to. And they were finding that obviously this is very indicative of high lethality. 34% of female victims of murder of other than not or non-negligent manslaughter, they're killed by their intimate partner. So basically 35% of murder victims are killed by their intimate And as we all know, the time after they leave is the most dangerous time. 75% of DV-related murders occur after the victim has left. And so these are just some of the. So here in New Hampshire, as far as LAP, it was implemented in 2010 as best practice. So it wasn't like you had to do it. It's more like it's highly recommended that you do it and you should do it. I think it's still kind of considered best practice, technically speaking, but there is definitely more of a push from everywhere to do this, because they're finding, obviously, that it's working and that it is helping. You know, not for nothing, Brad, you can put your 2 cents in here, but when I was a police officer, we were going to the same houses night after night after night. And, you know, it was, here's a card, they're a great resource, or even being uneducated. And I will tell you, I was one of those police officers that was uneducated and was like, why doesn't she just leave? Obviously, I definitely know better now. But those things are changing. And so this is helping so that these victims are being able to make the connections and getting the help so that we aren't going back again and again. They're supposed to be used on high risk domestic violence calls, not all domestic violence calls, technically speaking. I feel like law enforcement, if it's a DV call, they typically do a screening, but it always has to involve an intimate partner. Law enforcement has to believe there has been an assault, an attempted assault, or another domestic violence type crime. And they have to believe that if intervention does not take place, it is likely the victim will be seriously injured or killed. So with that being said, part of the LAP screening is, even if somebody doesn't screen in based on their answers to the questions, law enforcement can still initiate a call. They can call up and say, you know, this person didn't screen in. However, I'm still really concerned because, you know, we've been here every single night this week and her bruises are getting worse, or something like that, so that they can still initiate that contact even if the individual doesn't necessarily screen in per se. And these are some statistics for 2021. Yeah, 2020 through 2021. So in the state of New Hampshire, there were 13 domestic violence homicides, which comprised 59% of all of the homicides in the state of New Hampshire, so over 50%. 18% of homicides in the state were murder-suicide. Of that 18%, 100% of those were domestic violence related. So abuser kills victim, then kills self. 100%, which is not atypical. 39% of DV homicides, obviously perpetrated by an intimate partner. I say that obviously, sometimes I even forget DV also includes other family members. So this is obviously a little bit less than half. That shows that 50% of DV homicides were perpetrated by a family member. They also said, so this one is a little bit unique. Brad and I had a discussion about this because it looks a little odd. So in that time period, 60% of the DV homicide victims were men. So 7 of the 13 DV homicide victims were men, which they had said in the report that I got this from, that this was actually an anomaly, that this is not normally how it happens, but it just so happened that that year there were more men than women in that situation. 80% of DV homicide perpetrators are men. Roughly 38% of the homicides used a firearm.
I would say that if 7 of the 13 were men and 80% of the perpetrators are men, then probably some of them were same-sex couples.
Mhm.
And 80% of the perpetrators are men, and 80% of the perpetrators are men, then probably some of them were same-sex couples.
80%
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And in that time period, just over 3,200 lap calls or lap screenings were performed. 52% of them screened in as high danger. So they screened in as requiring or necessitating a phone call to the local DV agency. So the lap procedure, kind of from our perspective, law enforcement gets called to a domestic situation. The officer is going to do the screening. They're going to determine if the person is high risk. They're going to ask them the questions and record them on that piece of paper. This is kind of a review what we talked about earlier. They answer yes to question 1, 2, or 3, automatic referral. If they answer any yes at 4 questions from 4 through 12, automatically need to make a phone call. If the victim doesn't screen in, but the officer still thinks that they need help and it's a highly lethal situation, they can make a referral or make a call. Before calling, and actually probably before doing the screening, law enforcement, the officer is supposed to explain to the victim what the lap screening is, why they're doing it, basically explaining that there's a concern for their safety and that they're going to actually, after, if the person screens in, explain that, based on the answers to their questions, they feel that, this is a situation where they should really speak to somebody from the local DV agency and let them know I am going to call them so that you can speak to them. Again, whether they want to talk to us, whether they don't answer any of the questions, the officer should be calling us. When the officer calls, they're going to call the hotline. They're going to give them the hotline, their name, Officer Smith from Conway Police Department, and they're going to provide a phone number. That phone number should not be the victim's phone number. It should be the officer's phone number. I have found there have been a few times where the officer has actually provided the victim's number and not their own. Nothing we can do about it, but definitely not a practice that should be happening. When you call them back, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So every situation is definitely very different. I've had officers who will immediately tell me the victim answered yes to questions, 1, 5, 7, and 12. Others will just say, I'm here with so-and-so, and her, we came here because she had an incident with her boyfriend and she would like to talk to an advocate. Before talking to the victim, it is helpful if you can get a little background information. Big thing, has he been arrested? And again, I always say he, because statistically speaking, yada, yada, yada. Has he been arrested? Is there going to be a no contact order? And have you talked to the person about an emergency restraining order? Do they have one? Are they going to get one? That one's not super important. If there's a no contact order, the person is protected and they don't necessarily need the emergency order. However, sometimes it's still a thing. And then obviously it's always helpful to know the victim's name before we speak with them. When you talk to the victim, again, let them know who you are. I say where you're from. Typically, the officer is going to hand them the phone and they'll remind them, this is Penny from Starting Point. So, I always try to just reiterate, hi, this is Penny. Check on their well-being. I know oftentimes people say, don't ask them how they're doing, but I do. You know, but it's not like, oh, how's it going? You know, like, how are you doing? You know, can you tell me a little bit about what happened tonight? And, you know, talk briefly about the situation. I do typically find out whether they're going to get an emergency protection order. Also, whether at this point, they also usually know about getting a protection order at the court the next day. So following up with them to make sure or to find out if they're going the next day and let them know that we can have somebody go with them to help fill out the paperwork. Safety plan with them. Are you safe tonight? Do you have a safe place to stay? You know, do you have family nearby? Sometimes they'll say, oh, I have a friend that's coming here. Or no, I feel fine staying at the house, even if he does get released tonight. Okay, let's talk about, well, if he, heaven forbid, happens to show up, make sure I always tell people, make sure you find a safe place in your house and you call 911. You don't have to confront him. You don't have to talk to him. You don't have to tell him to leave. You call 911 and let police come and deal with him. And the important part is just reminding them that they need to be safe and find a safe place for themselves. Ask them for their phone number and if it would be okay for someone to follow up the next day. And again, I always make sure that they have our information in the support line and say, you know, if you need anything else tonight, make sure you give us a call.
So sometimes just because they've got an order, like there's a no contact order, he's been arrested and bailed, and there's a no contact order, or there's an emergency order. Sometimes they still don't feel safe in the home. So it's, do you have a safe place to go, a safe place to stay? Because I had one woman who literally, his mother lived behind them, his brother lived beside them, his
Ugh.
uncle lived to the other. I mean, and basically the
Or a
whole state was
compound.
his family. She was literally in enemy territory. So she did have a safe place to go, but if she hadn't, we would have probably hoteled her for the night.
Yeah.
And in those circumstances, if the victim is saying they don't feel safe or you feel that they may not be safe, we obviously don't want to promise them anything. However, that would be a situation where, you know, you could mention that you need to touch base with your backup and give them a call right back. And then you would certainly give your backup a call and have a discussion with them about the situation. Again, it's important to remember it is the victim's decision as to whether they talk to you. If they choose not to, that's fine. There's still a way to communicate and get the information you need. So you can still get the background information from the officer. You know, can you tell me a little bit about what's going on? The other thing I often try to do is ask the officer to ask the victim if it would be okay for the officer to give you their name and phone number so that somebody can call them the next day. And we've actually had people that have said, yeah, I can't talk to anybody right now, but I would like to talk to somebody tomorrow. I've also like gotten on the phone with somebody who within 2 minutes, like, I can't talk right now. And when I said, okay, would you like somebody to follow up and call you tomorrow? Yeah, once I've had time to process and get through everything, then I'll talk to somebody. So it's not a loss just because they don't talk to us. There's still that opportunity to make the connection. And, you know, especially if you're still asking for their phone number and asking if it's okay to follow up, they realize that you're invested and that you care. It's not just the like, oh, they're just making this phone call because they have to. You know, you're putting that out there that, yes, we do care. Yes, we want to help you. So yeah, you don't want to talk to us today. Maybe we can try again tomorrow. And then it's always important to make sure that the officer has given them our information so they at least have our hotline number. So at the end of the phone call, before you wrap up, you just want to make sure that the safety plan is in place, kind of review it briefly, confirm any follow-up plans. Okay, somebody's going to call you tomorrow, or when you're ready to go to court, you'll give us a call and we'll make arrangements, and make sure that they have our phone number in case they need to call. After the call, if you need to discuss or process the situation, again, give us a call. That's what we're here for. Sometimes it's just a matter of you need to talk through it, or you know, just maybe updating them in case somebody calls. And then, as with any crisis line call, reaching out to either Brad or myself so that we can fill out a contact sheet for entering into the database. And that is all she wrote.
Okay, thank you.
Good job, Penny.
Yeah,
Penny,
very
that-
good job, Penny. You did good.
Thank
That is
you.
a
Very helpful,
important
thank you.
question, Penny.
Okay.
So on the car 54 slide, does anyone remember the name of the officers?
Oh,
Wasn't it
No.
like Muldoon and something else? Muldoon and
Sounds
Toohey or
about
something like
right.
that?
That sounds about right.
Yeah, I think so.
I can tell
I
you the
kept-
names from Adam 12.
Now you're going back there.
Pete Malloy and Jim Reed.
One of my other presentations that I have is, I think it's around the DV statute, and it talks about family, and I have a picture of the Adams family.
Yeah, that's,
that goes along with it. So I like to try to find those things. That's with that. I tried to find, I was struggling because I really wanted just the bat phone for that phone call of like calling your backup. But all I could find was Batman talking to the commissioner.
that was a good one.
So I almost put the bat signal up there too, but you know, I find those things fun and interesting. You know, it's the stuff that we talk about